Resilience at its simplest form is so as an individual or an organization, what it does is it strengthens your approach and your perspective to problem solve.
How do you foster this environment where people feel like, you know what, if I have a question, I'm going to go ahead and ask that question and not feel self-conscious about it?
It's all about creating that safe environment, and it's 100% starting with me. Leaders have to model these behaviors. So they have to be transparent about the problems that we're dealing with, involve others in the problem solving. So you're teaching your organization how to become problem solvers, and eventually you can be proactive problem solvers, which is where you want to get. You have to be aware of yourself as an organization. Look to make sure that you're not self-inflicting your own problems and creating your own crises and expecting the end to be employee resilient.
So how do I draw that line between when to be sort of supportive and courteous, but at the same time, making sure I'm holding people accountable to what I know we can do?
We have to first define what vulnerability is not. It's not weakness. Vulnerability, what that does is it brings a human into leadership. It makes leaders approachable, and that's how you build trust. So trust comes first. So once you build that trust, I think the next stage where you go into, where you start to go into accountability is, and this is one area I do not think we always do well, is
My very special guest is the Chief People Officer at California Pizza Kitchen. She has over 20 years of experience in the hospitality and tech industries. She's known for driving change, fostering resiliency, and spearheading innovations through a people-centric approach. She is Shannon Kirk. Welcome to the show, Shannon.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited. We had a quick conversation, but now we're here live at Transform, and I can't wait to chat with you all about the great things that you've done in your organization.
Perfect.
I know you're going to be talking about resilience, and you've taught me that resilience is more than just surviving challenges. It's about how do we thrive and really use and look at these challenges as not as obstacles, but as growth opportunities. So I wanted to see how you can recommend that organizations build that type of resilience as a competency, when so often we're tempted to say like, oh, I don't need to be resilient. I'm just going to muscle my way through this, for example.
Which makes you exhausted. So I think first we need to define what resilience does, right? So resilience at its simplest form is problem solving and also your reaction to challenges. So as an individual or an organization, what it does is it strengthens your approach and your perspective to problems. So I think I don't think an organization says, hey, we're going to just build resilience. It's about looking at what those competencies are that make up resilience. So I think instead of saying, we're going to train resilience as an organization, you define what the competencies are that make up resilience. So things like communication, emotional intelligence, problem solving, and you build those into your leadership program so they become part of your culture. I think secondarily, leaders have to model these behaviors. So they have to be transparent about the problems that we're dealing with, involve others in the problem solving. So you're teaching your organization how to become problem solving and eventually you can be proactive problem solvers, which is where you want to get. The one call out that I will make is you have to be aware of yourself as an organization and look to make sure that you're not self-inflicting your own problems and creating your own crises and expecting the answer to be employee resilience. Mm-hmm. So you have to be aware enough of yourself as an organization to say, where are our deficiencies in our programs, our systems? What are the things that are stopping us or creating our own problems so that we don't just say, oh, you employees, it's your fault. You have to be more resilient. No, we have to be aware as an organization, make sure we're fostering that right environment and we're using resilience to be proactive and address those challenges versus being in this survival loop.
I love how you frame that, because starting in the beginning where you're saying like resilience is this really referenceable umbrella term, but it's hard to make that actionable until we take a way of breaking it down into those more competencies that we can really relate to and really see ourselves advancing and training on those things. I feel like that's so much more actionable than this thing. It's so big almost that's really hard to feel like you can do anything to really advance it.
Right. It's a buzzword.
Yeah, it's a buzzword.
It's a buzzword for sure, but it's so critical. It really is. And I think, to be honest, before the pandemic, resilience was something you read about in books, right? Athletes or people that had overcome great challenges, or it was Silicon Valley companies. How, they're innovating, they're being resilient, they're doing all these great things. The pandemic brought it to our forefront for all of us. We all had to become resilient and understand, how do we manage that so we're not getting burned out. We're not just going with brute force to try to tackle these things, but we're building that competency and that skill set to be able to handle these challenges and not only handle them, look for the opportunities.
Yeah, I'm buying into that big time. I definitely was the kind of manager who's like, I have to muscle through. People are going to think less of me if I don't, have this strong back and I can just, fight through these things. And I only come to realize it's not sustainable.
It's not. And I think you see a lot right now, especially of people getting burnout, especially in the HR space. You have a lot of people that are just getting burnt out because they tried to muscle through because that skill set wasn't there. And also, there's a vulnerability in raising your hand and saying, I need balance, I need help. And it's okay to ask for that. It is a sign of strength, but we don't feel that way. We feel like we have to say, I got this, I can do it, I can do it again and again and again. But you're human, and we have to acknowledge that we're human.
And I love that for HR leaders, for line of business leaders, you also highlighted the importance of bringing others in on the problem solving. And I think one of the things that sometimes leaders hesitate is saying, well, isn't that what I'm paid to do? Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Solve all the problems and have all the answers? And it really starts to erode our ability to develop other problem solvers. And so, as leaders, we're expected to develop other leaders. But can you talk a little bit about that trade off that people experience sometimes of saying, like, how do I actually do the work that I feel good about? Because it's nice to solve problems, but at the same time, I might burn myself out and miss an opportunity to develop my employees.
The thing about there, I think there's a saying, I'm going to get the saying wrong, but you're only so strong as yourself, but you're stronger as a team. And there is a certain thing you have to address within leadership about ego. And you have to understand that when you empower others around you, when you involve them in this, you get to such a stronger place, right? So it's better for the team, it's better for the organization. And I have grown so much by challenging others to think differently, to push boundaries, to call out. One of the things I always say is, I don't want anyone to ever bring to me, "Oh, this is why we've always done it this way," right? We've always done it this way, so we're gonna continue to do that. N Not a good answer. And so when you create that environment as a leader, you actually get to a higher place as a leader. So you could think, "Hey, I'm just gonna own this small patch of it," but you could own the whole farm, right? And so I think if you figure out how to change your perspective as a leader and understand the empowerment capability of people on your team, to problem solve and to help re-envision the future, you just get to such a better place.
Yeah. And one of the things that you taught me was how it's so important for leaders to create this open environment where people feel safe and comfortable asking questions, which isn't naturally a thing people are always willing to do. Can you tell me about how some of that might work at CPK, for example? Like, how do you foster this environment where people feel like, you know what, if I have a question, I'm going to go ahead and ask that question and not feel self conscious about it?
Yeah, so it's all about creating it's all about creating that safe environment, and it's 100% starting with a leader. So you have to create the environment where people feel safe to raise their hands, to express viewpoints, and you start that by being vulnerable yourself of saying, "Hey, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm not." Like everybody on my team knows, I'm not a details person, not my forte. And so that already creates that, that approachability. And so we start to understand what everybody's roles is. We start to build that trust amongst our team. And another thing that I think is important is we talk about problem solving, we talk about failure, we talk about learning from it, but you have to empower the voices on your team. And one of the ways that I do that is I'll give you a visual. So say your problem is a cube, multi-dimensional cube, right? And so every person on that team has a different vantage point of that cube. So if you don't raise your hand and say, "This is what I'm seeing on my portion of the cube," we have a blind, and we're creating a blind spot. So everybody's voice matters, everyone's perspective matters. And so when you give people a role, they have that sense of empowerment and they feel safe to express that. And it's also how you react to that, how you deal with that. People, again, you've got to model the behavior that you want to see as a leader.
Yeah, I always like to say that leaders, we have to go first. And like you, I'm not that detail oriented. You're in PI terms, you're a maverick and I'm a persuader. So not necessarily our strong suit. And I can totally see where your cube analogy is so great. It's like when you start to say like, what am I not seeing here? Like, sure, I'm intrepid. I want to make decisions. I want to go fast, but I could get us in trouble here. So what are you seeing? And really honoring all the voices of the team members that have different behavioral strengths as us, different perspective to your point. Like we're only stronger if we bring all that stuff together, but that requires that environment that you describe where people feel safe doing that.
Exactly.
And I think that a lot of times something else that you had said was the willingness to make yourself vulnerable first. So, and again, when it comes down to, I had this experience where I thought, man, if people see me as vulnerable, they're not going to see me as credible. But what I found to be true is exactly the opposite. It allowed me to bring people in and draw them to have a stronger connection because I gave permission for everybody to say, well, geez, if he's not okay and he's running the team, then maybe it's okay if we're not, absolutely perfect all the time because nobody really is.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. I wanted to ask you too, when it comes down to a couple of these tensions that we often see inside of organizations, Shannon. The one is talking about this. We've been talking about vulnerability, but it's corollary around accountability.
Mhm.
So how can I make myself vulnerable or offer up this sort of kind of safety we've been talking about? But if I do that, I might naturally be worried that the work's not going to get done. So how do I draw that line between when to be sort of supportive and courteous, but at the same time making sure I'm holding people accountable to what I know we can do?
Yeah, so I'm going to approach this from a slightly different angle. So I think, and you touched on a little bit, we have to first define what vulnerability is not. It's not weakness, right? So I think if you look up the definition of it, you think it's vulnerability is going to be weakness, but vulnerability, what that does is it brings a human into leadership. Right. It makes leaders approachable. And so, again, like I said, hey, you raise your hand and say, this is what I'm not great at. This is, whatever. And so you create that trust. And that's how you build trust. So trust comes first. So once you build that trust, I think the next stage where you go into where you start to go into accountability is, and this is one area I do not think we always do well, is you have to set the expectation. So you start at the individual. What is your expectation? What is your role in what is your role? What is your role in this project? What is your role in this team? And so then what that starts is individual accountability. So I'm going to hold myself accountable because I know what to hold myself accountable to. The next layer of that is a team accountability. So if I'm clear to the team, what does winning look like? What is our shared goal? What are we trying to achieve? And what's each person's role in that? They start to hold each other accountable. Hey, I need this from you in order to do X. And so you start to have that layer of accountability. And the third layer is leadership accountability. And that's where the tension comes in, right? So the leader is balancing that tension between vulnerability, I'll just call it open and transparent communication, the feedback loop, and then the accountability that you have to do because what you can't do is tolerate negative behaviors. You cannot. They will tear apart your team so quickly. So you have to be able to address them and address them quickly to protect the team. And so they're relying on you as a leader to do that, and they're watching you to do that, to saying, okay, what are you reinforcing and what are you not? Because your actions and what you do and say as a leader are very strong and clear.
I never really thought about it that way before, but I love how you've layered on accountability. We create a culture of accountability. We've got employees feeling their own sense of accountability, teammates as well. So it makes the leader's job a little bit more shared. But then we also say, hey, leader, by the way, you got to have established that clarity first, because if they're not sure what to do, then it's not fair to hold them accountable to something so ambiguous. And we see so many reports that the frontline leaders, the individual contributors, for example, are unclear, especially in times of change, about what's really expected of them. And yet here it comes like, oh, I wish my people would be more accountable. I wish you'd be more clear about what you want.
Yeah.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah, you have to have both. And like I said, I think it's one of the things that we get wrong. And I don't know if it's we're moving too fast or we're not clear, but if you're not clear, they're not clear. And I think we get upset with people with their performance, but we haven't set the expectation and we haven't defined it. And so to your point, you can't hold them accountable. What are you holding them accountable for?
Yeah, we have to do our job to be fully explicit about that. But I want to ask you about another tension too, because I know this happens in your business as well. And it's this tension between stability, nice and predictable, smooth sailing, but also innovation when it's needed. There's a natural tension between, well, we know this process, for example, we know how this works, we know how to produce in this way, but we also need to update some things, change some things, take advantage of new things. How do you recommend that leaders can really balance that natural tension between stability but then innovation?
So I'll repeat a lot of what I said. You've got to define roles, right? So you've got to define the rules in the process. And so you're going to naturally always have your innovators. So these are your question askers, the why, what, when, how. They're always pushing the boundaries of what can be done, bringing the ideas. What you often find is that group are not good implementers. So you need the next group. So you have your innovators. Your next group is the ones who translate that strategy into tasks. So they're also often the people that are your stabilizers in the business. They're your payroll processors or your accounting team. And what happens is when they're helping to translate that into task, they can raise their hand and say, "Oh, wait, I know what the day to day is like. That's not going to work here, right?" So they can raise their hand and create this critical feedback loop to make sure that that's successful or to call out what may or may not work. And then the third group really is your communicators. So that is a very critical role because your communicators, anytime you innovate, you need to it's a change management. You need to bring people along in the process. So your communicators are probably like your ER managers or your trainers, people that already have the connection and the trust built in those relationships. And so they can help people go along in the process because they help with the people component of change and innovation. And that's just as critical. So those are the three roles that I would say I would divide to help balance the stability and the innovation.
I think in my experience, that when it really invites in a lot of these collisions when it comes to collisions almost of worldviews. So communicators appreciate crisp communication. That's what they want. And the same is true for innovators who are like, we want change, we want dynamic, we want these very alive organizations. But it's only when we stop and appreciate the roles that others play and realize that we're part of a team and we need all of these things that I feel like we can pre-negotiate in our differences and really see the team's diversity in that case of behavioral styles as really a strength. So I think that's you really highlighted in a very actionable way, and I think our listeners can ask her like, which role do I most naturally fit in? Or maybe I'm really great at innovation. I'm okay at communication, but if I'm being honest, implementing, no way, not a strength of mine. This is hypothetical. But, yeah, so, I mean, how do you approach that? Like, is this something specific with consulting you provide to your teams and help them think about this as these roles, or is this something you've really just observed in terms of what it takes to be successful?
I think observed. One of the things that I think is really important is just awareness. I think it's something that when you find a lot of tension points, it's just lack of awareness. So it's lack of awareness of self or your team, and to really understand the dynamics. So sometimes it's a conversation around what do you like? What do you gravitate towards? And sometimes you'll find that there's a little bit of disconnect because you're like, I'm not so sure. And then it's a lot of your own observation of, hey, why don't you try this? And so you're helping to kind of nurture and guide people to where you think they're going to best excel. And so I just think awareness is the key, and getting feedback, but also observing and giving your own kind of guidance.
I love that. And I love the fact that feedback in that way that fosters awareness, it can be so different. Like you might find that I'm naturally innovative within our local small team setting, but when I'm in a cross functional team, maybe I'm not as willing to be innovative because I don't want to be seen as not knowledgeable. And you're like, well, okay, let's raise some awareness to that. I saw in the meetings that we have with the larger team, you're not as quite as quick to speak up and you have so many great ideas. Why are you holding back? That's where I think awareness really helps all employees really find their next level. And for you as the leader saying, how can I enhance others' awareness and certainly maintain it for myself?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's wild. I love that. And I think that also you shared for me, for example, we talked about the burnout that can happen, the resilience that we need, and these healthy boundaries. We've all need time away from work as well. Sometimes we need to advocate for ourselves if we're experiencing sort of the beginnings of that type of burnout. How do you provide advice, or what has worked for you maybe when it comes to trying to establish those healthy boundaries so that we can really show up at our best at work?
Yeah, so I talk about it, and this is one of the vulnerability things. So I talk about it to the team when I do it well and when I don't do it well, because I feel like it's important. So we share a lot of what we do is we share in my kind of team dynamic is, hey, what are you passionate about? Like, what do you love to do outside of work? Maybe it's I love to go to Disneyland, or I like to go to bookstores, or I like gaming, or I just like going to my kids baseball game. And so it's understanding what fuels them inside and outside of work, because you can kind of hold them to that. Hey, have you done that recently? Have you invested in yourself and your time? And when I don't do well, I talk about it. So when I haven't taken time off, I'll be like, I need to take some time off. Or my team will say, hey, you need to go to Disneyland, or you need to go do something to like recharge yourself. So we start to hold each other accountable, because who you are outside of work is just as important as who you are inside. And if you respect that as a leader, you get so much more. I also put some guardrails around. So if I know somebody's taken a day off or time off, I'll say, and I see them responding to email, or they don't put an out of office on, I'm reaching out and saying, hey, put your out of office on. You need to take your time off. It's so important to be present in the moment with what you're doing. And so a lot of it's modeling, but it's also real conversations about, sometimes it's an ebb and a flow, and it's hard to manage the balance.
I think your team members are so lucky. They're getting this role modeling that you're talking about. You've got a very holistic view about what it takes to be successful and stay successful, and how every team member can bring their own strengths. But there's one other thing before we wrap that I wanted to really touch on, and this is the CPK Kindness Fund. And you've been a part of this program for a long time, and I just wanted to see your take on. Briefly tell us, what is the CPK Kindness Fund, and how have you seen it evolve since it began back in 2016?
It was actually 2012. So
2012.
I
Oh my
gave you
gosh.
the wrong date. We've been around a little longer. So the Kindness Fund started, it's a 501c3, and it started with a very simple yet profound purpose of helping employees in a time of unforeseen crisis. So it's an employee to employee peer giving program. So the powerful thing about that is I can work in Illinois, you can work in California. Our paths may never cross, but if something happens to you, I got you. And so as an organization, to feel like you've got that way to care for each other is so powerful. So the fund has evolved over the years. One of the biggest stories I think of the fund was around the pandemic. So at the start of the pandemic, I mean, it was crazy. It was brutal for everyone. We had to furlough 7,000 employees, I believe, in the space of 2 days. So highly traumatic for everyone involved. And the purpose of the organization for those of us were like, how do we get the restaurants open? How do we up third party or delivery so that we can get more people back to work? But in the meantime, the Kindness Fund stood up. And so the Kindness Fund helped employees that were affected pay rent, pay bills. During the pandemic, the Kindness Fund distributed over $1.2 million to help those employees in need. And so that's the power of the fund. And over the years, I think we've helped 1,500 employees, I think a total of 3 million. So you can see how much we gave during the pandemic and why it was so impactful. But that is such a strong thing as an organization to care for each other in times of need so that you don't feel isolated and that you're all alone.
It's an incredible organization. It's an incredible cultural booster. Just feeling, like you said, that people that you're part of this